On the bench today we have yet another Cobra 2000 GTL. This one was sent in for basically full restoration, so change all the caps, remove the glue, new heatsink compound on all the semiconductors, pull the heat sinks out, clean it up, clean the controls, and that's pretty much it. Just basically put it back the way it should be. A customer also sent along the lens. I don't know if somebody tried to polish the bezel or something, but there's a little bit of streaking on the lens. And not sure where in the heck he got this thing at, but there's a brand new lens. So need to stick that in there. I'm just actually wondering if that is a factory. Yeah. No, I don't know. The type font is a little bit thicker. I don't know if that might be aftermarket. But it doesn't matter. We'll get that stuck in there. Now, one thing I have noticed, and you may see it right now. Now, I can tell you right now, it has no channel modifications. Look on the bottom side of this board, in the PLL area, it's virgin. Never been touched. And it has an MB8734 in it, so these could only be, with that PLL, could only be expanded so far. The 8719s was the common mod for these. You take that PLL out and you stick an 8719 in. But so this is unmodified, and you can see I have it on channel 2, and yeah, something is not right over here. Like, channel 1 should be 26.965, channel 40 should be 27.405. Yeah, something is definitely wrong with this radio. Now, the first thing I noticed was, at some point in history, there has been an explosion in this radio. Oh, and it also does not transmit. It does receive static, so it is receiving somewhat. But let me just flip the radio over. Like I say, there has been a bit of a kapoof in this thing at one point in time. Look down here in the area where the power cord comes in. You may notice it's a little bit black right there. And you'll also may notice something else if you're familiar with looking at the underside of Cobra 2000s. There's a circuit board missing right here. Yeah, there's supposed to be the safety bypass caps. That board, yeah, well, apparently it went kapoof, and somebody just omitted the board. Yeah, bad idea. So I have lots of these parts chassis, so I'll get a new filter board to stick in here, and I'll replace that. And like I say, you can see the PLL area here. Completely modification free. It's not like it's ever been, it's not like it's been hacked and put back to original. No cut traces whatsoever. The radio, I haven't even checked. Let's see, at least on the underside, the modulation limiter doesn't look like it's been removed. Take a peek on the top side here. Yep, it's gone. That's the one thing everybody does. Destroy their audio by removing the modulation limiter. So yeah, there's 3 leads sticking up out of the board right there, so that'll get replaced. Just a cheap couple cent transistor. But anyhow, back to our problem. So we have a radio that turns on, doesn't transmit. Frequencies seem to be all whacked out, and actually it seems to be going up in frequency as it's sitting here. Yeah, because that was on, what, 27.2 something before? Now it's in the 500s. Yeah. Now, before I do any troubleshooting on something like this, the customer wants all the electrolytic capacitors replaced. So I will do that. And I'm also going to remove all the corrosive glue. But I just want to check something, and we can do it here on camera. See the PLL chip down here, the back couple legs? What do we have there? Glue. There's always glue here, all around the VCO block. There's certain areas in this radio, the filter here, the ceramic, or the ferrite beads on the ceramic caps here, the little small toroid transformer, any ferrite beads throughout this radio have that glue on it. Well, they put glue right here. The problem is that glue usually gets to the rear 2 or 3 pins on the PLL chip. As that glue over the decades dries out, it becomes corrosive and conductive. And I'm almost curious if maybe that's the problem. So let's just turn the radio off. Try and get the camera off to the side here so it's out of my way somewhat. So I can actually get in here. And bit of extra light so I can see what the heck I'm doing here. I'm not going to do a really good job. I just want to get this glue off of these pins really quick and see if she springs back to life, at least on the correct frequencies. Oh, this camera, man, it's just, the camera never works. Okay, let me try and spin it around in this direction. Yeah, I can get... Trying to work around the camera is a royal pain in the butt. And... no, that didn't fix it. It was worth a try. Like I said, I was just curious, because if it shorts out the pins on the PLL chip, that could cause odd frequency problems. And actually, there's no saying that, I don't guess either of those pins are broken off, which is another common problem you'll find. That glue gets onto these pins, and it'll corrode, just boop, they'll be gone. And the same thing goes for the VCO block here. This glue gets down around the pins, it oozes down, and it will just corrode the leads right off of the VCO block. So, you know, anything that glue's touching is suspect, especially for problems like that. And that's why it's a good idea to take care of things like that first. Get all this glue out of here in the transmit section. You can see it all down around this toroid transformer. This glue, usually, I'll break it out of here, but it's usually not touching anything on the top here. But it's all down along the side here, so all these resistors, a lot of times, I'll have to replace, you know, 3 or 4 of these resistors in this cap right here. The glue that's around the main audio filter cap here, you know, that usually just comes out when you pull the cap out. It'll be stuck to it and it'll pop out. But it's good to see that none of the glue is around the crystals, because sometimes this glue, it'll ooze over to the crystal, you know, when they're pouring it, when it was fresh, and it gets underneath of the crystals and eats the leads off of the crystals. Yeah, that doesn't seem to be the case here. So like I say, that's the first thing I'm going to do. Recap, remove the glue, and I'll see, you know, once I get that done, I'll see, you know, try the radio again and see if transmit has returned and if it actually goes on the frequencies it's supposed to. I mean, it could be as simple as possibly the VCO being out of lock, especially if that glue's shorting out, like right here, shorting out a couple of the pins on this V, and there's probably glue from here. This transistor's oozed down. That could cause a problem like this, because if the VCO's not working properly, that's what sets the steps, the step size, you know, your VCO voltage and everything here. So, you know, that could cause anything basically in this area right here. It could cause weird problems like that. So, in any case, let me get the degluing and recapping, and we'll return. So next time you see it, it should be, for starters, a lot cleaner. I'll get my camera turned back around here. You know, on camera it may look fairly clean, but yeah, in person it's actually rather dusty down in there. It doesn't look bad, but you know, grab a dust brush here. You know, I can make it look even cleaner. You can get the board really shining, get in there with a dust brush. So yeah, it just needs a little bit of dusting out in the vacuum cleaner job. That'll get her cleaned up really good. So I shall return and see how we made out. Okay, so the radio is pretty much completely done now, with the exception of just cleaning the faceplate, just giving it a quick wipe down. The customer did not send, not sure if I mentioned that or not, he did not send the cabinet cover with it, you know, and honestly, I don't need that unless I need to do some repairs to it or something. I mean, it's just a wood cabinet, you know, that adds weight for shipping, and there's just a chance that, you know, that can always get damaged in shipping, especially if a radio is not packaged properly. So I replaced all the electrolytic capacitors in the radio, removed all the corrosive glue. Now, if you remember right, you turn the channel selector, and yeah, there was definitely something was just not right in this radio. And as I say, if you know you're going to be replacing all the electrolytic capacitors and you're going to be removing the glue anyhow, the customer wants that work done, do it first. Don't waste your time troubleshooting problems that might just vanish. Well, that did not turn out to be the case with this radio. Many times it is. That's why I always suggest doing that first. You know, now I know it's not not a corrosive glue problem. I know it's not an electrolytic capacitor. Now it makes, troubleshooting. That just, for starters, that knocks all of that stuff out. I don't have to worry about that. And it didn't take long to find out what was wrong. And what was wrong, it's over here somewhere, is the PLL chip was actually bad. Not sure what happened to this little critter. Now remember, there had been apparently some fire... Turn it down a little bit. There had been some fireworks on the underside of this radio. The AC filter and safety bypass cap board was just missing. It was gone, and you could see the scorched aluminum under there when it blew out. So I don't know if maybe that had something to do with this or not, but once I fired the radio back up, it still had the same problem. Would not transmit. Now it would receive, but the receive frequency was continuously changing. So that tells me the PLL is not locked, because when the PLL goes out of lock, you can't transmit. It does prevent it from transmitting, and it's not in lock. That means the frequency is changing, which is exactly what it was doing. So first thing I did was check to see if I had voltage going to the PLL chip, which is on pin 9, if memory serves correctly. I did have voltage. Checked for voltage at pin 1. I had, that was fairly close. So I'd say the voltage at pin 1 was correct. I checked pin 2 and 3, yeah, they were wrong. It was supposed to be like, trying to remember, was like 4 volts on pin 2 and like 5 on pin 3, I think. I had like 1.2 on pin 2 and nothing on pin 3. More importantly, when I attach an oscilloscope to pin 8, that is your normal test point for checking to see what your reference oscillator crystal is oscillating at, the 10.240. It was dead. There was no 10.240 megahertz frequency there. So I then checked for DC voltage. Again, no voltage. So pin 7 and 8 should have voltage on them. The crystal, that 10.240 crystal, just look down in here actually, grab a pointy stick. This crystal is actually attached across pin 7 and 8. So there was no voltage there. No voltage, the crystal's never going to oscillate. So that pretty much like I say, it only took like a minute or less to check that. And yeah, that pretty much tells me voltages are all wrong. It's the bad IC. Popped in another MB8734. It's back working again. Let's see what else. Removed the heat sinks, cleaned them up, applied new heatsink compound or thermal pads. These should have the ceramic insulators on there, but like this one, I'm not going to go putting a mica insulator back in there with heatsink compound. I'll use more modern sill pads that pretty much last forever. You never have to worry about them. Same thing here. New heatsink compound. The modulation limiter was reinstalled. That was the only other real modification I saw in this, was someone had clipped the modulation limiter out. So that's been reinstalled, so it's putting out exactly at 100% modulation. Output power is good. Receive sensitivity is good. Let's see, what else was there? Oh, yeah. The lens. Oh, boy. I think the customer got duped. So, if you remember, I think I said, and I might have shown it, the customer sent along another lens for the frequency counter clock here. It was supposed to be a new old stock. Well, the first thing I noticed was, of course, I've pulled the faceplate apart, have taken out the old lens, already popped the lens out, and I'm looking at the new one. For starters, it's like 3 times thicker. This lens is actually very, very thin. I mean, it's like that. This lens, not so much. This is a thick one. It's like 3 to 4 times thicker than that lens. The other thing is, you notice something? It's a smoked gray color. Yeah, it's what they call smoked. That's not supposed to be smoked. That's kind of a purpley... Actually, most red LEDs, if you ever take the displays out of most any radio that has red displays, you're going to find the lenses. They're kind of a weird purplish, kind of violet color. They're not red lenses. They're, like I say, they're kind of a weird purple color. Yeah. Another thing that tells me this isn't original. So I thought, well, that's no biggie. It's aftermarket. I don't have a problem putting an aftermarket lens in. Somebody made them. Hey, that's great. So I peel the protective paper off of the backside. I go to peel the protective film off of the front of this thing, and look what happens. Where in the hell's the lettering at? It's on the protective film. Some nitwit printed the lettering on the protective film. They didn't print it on the lens itself where it's supposed to be. This stuff has to be removed because you can just see just me waving it in front of the camera lens here. I haven't pulled it off on this side. This is the only part where I started to peel it off, and I quickly realized, I was like, what the? I was like, ah. Look, you can see how this stuff has to be removed. It's not a smooth, it's rubbery type plastic. It's really spongy, it scratches, and the main thing is it's all kind of a mottled finish. It's not smooth. And you can see as I move that around how much you can see nice, clear, well-defined digits, very sharp. You look through this lens, it's all fuzzy, and you see how it changes? That's because this stuff has to come off. Somebody printed on that. Yeah. So yeah, I'll be sending that back to the customer. Now, what it looked like had happened to this lens, I think somebody tried to polish the chrome possibly around the bezel here with like a Dremel tool and a little buffing wheel or something and slipped. It's almost what it looked like. There was a mark right across here. So I already had this lens out in my hand because I was getting ready to put that one in. So I was able to buff this lens out to the point where, yeah, unless you're really, really looking close at it, you're not going to notice that. I was able to get most of that stuff buffed out, so that's fine now. And I guess that's about it on the top side. Oh, I did replace all the light bulbs. 2 of them were out, the ones that are normally out. Unless you talk sideband, then you'll often see the lower sideband light burned out. But for AM talkers, the AM light bulb's usually one of the first ones to go out, and the receive light. Both of the meter lights, I think they both worked, but they had been replaced at some point in time. And then the other 2, the upper sideband, lower sideband, and transmit light were still original. Asked the customer what did he want me to do. I said, I can either just replace those 2 light bulbs with normal incandescent light bulbs, put it back to stock, or do you want LED? So he said to go ahead and put LEDs in it. So all of these are now LEDs. That's why they're a little bit brighter, especially the function and mode switch indications. They're a little bit brighter because they're actually LEDs now. And I think that's it on the top side. Like I say, the inside really clean. It didn't really need a lot. Just basically a vacuuming, a little bit of buffing, and taking a few dust bunnies out of there, and that was pretty much about it. Like I say, it hadn't been hacked at it with the exception of the modulation limiter. You can see I've already resealed everything with wax there. So I'll turn her off and get her flipped over. Get my camera up here a little bit. And I just have a little bit of wiring to tie up on the underside here. So you can see we now have the proper circuit board. So this came out of a parts chassis. So that is a correct Cobra 2000 AC input filter board has been installed. Yeah, other than that, did unlock the clarifier. The customer did want the clarifier unlocked, so that's why I have some wiring to tie up here. But yeah, otherwise, yeah, that's the only, as far as modifications go, yeah, it's got LED lights and the clarifier is unlocked. Other than that, it's all original. Really nice. Still completely virgin in the PLL area. Everything's original as it's supposed to be there. So, yep, that's about it. Another nice clean one. It's so nice when I get ones that aren't butchered. And of course the frequency counter clock module, replace the electrolytic caps in there. Again, fresh heatsink compound or a thermal pad. And I know some people ask about, Mike, why don't you bridge up the crystals? Well, they don't need it. I have completely never understood that. Why people see the need to solder a wire from this crystal can to something to support it. It's been doing just fine for the last 30, sometimes in some radios, 40 or more years. Crystal hasn't been affected yet. the big thing to remember is if you go soldering a wire to that crystal and attaching it to the ground plane, you may affect how the crystal operates. Got to remember, it's a crystal, it's an oscillator. You can try this as an experiment. Hook up a frequency counter, let's say like this crystal here, okay? You'd hook up a frequency counter right here, because when you're making your adjustments for your AM upper and lower sideband, you'd be attached to this test point, and you'd be adjusting the oscillation frequency, actually the tripler, that's the tripler circuit, but still, that's from this crystal here. And you're adjusting these 3 tunable transformers right here. If you just take a piece of wire, like this one has, and I think this originally did, especially with the larger one. Now, that's the thing. Sometimes they will. If the manufacturer soldered a wire to it, that was the electrical engineer that designed the radio said, yes, we need to ground that can. If they didn't do it, don't. You don't know what that's going to do to your oscillator circuit. That will actually change the frequency. And that's what you can do. You can take a crystal, random crystal in a radio, if it doesn't have a wire on it, you can solder a wire to something and then touch the can and watch your frequency counter. You'll see your frequency change when you ground and unground that can, because you have to remember there's going to be, this can is surrounding that crystal element. Well, that's going to act like a capacitor. Now, if it's floating in air, it's not making any electrical contact with the circuit in the radio, so it's not going to have a capacitive effect. Once you ground this can, it now has a reference to ground, because you have attached it to ground, and you've effectively turned that metal can into a capacitor, and of course capacitors are going to change your oscillation frequency. That's why there are ceramic capacitors attached into these circuits. Or, in the case of, for adjustment, there's something like right there, there's trimmer capacitors. See, it's just something to remember. If the manufacturer didn't put a wire grounding the can to DC ground, don't do it. They didn't do it for a reason. If they wanted it grounded, they would have grounded it themselves. And you will frequently see them grounded. But like I say, that's from the factory. The people that designed the radio know that, yes, okay, in this instance, we want the can grounded. If they don't do it. People just have this fixation, or I don't even know what to call it, that they must tinker and must modify everything. I don't know if it's, the can's not over far enough. I don't know if it's just they're trying to find stuff to charge people for when they work on radios, doing a bunch of work that's not needed. It's either that or they just like making life hard on themselves. I just never understand that. You see so much stuff like that. Lots of times you'll see work being done that just plain flat out doesn't need to be done. So, yeah, say if somebody tells you you need to bridge up all your crystals, and they're telling you a bunch of stuff like that, tell them no, just whatever work you want done, that's it. You don't need a bunch of this extra stuff. They're just sucking money out of your wallet is all they're doing. The only thing an old radio like this should need, as long as it hasn't been butchered, and you need to undo modifications, the only thing anything old and electronic needs is replace the electrolytic capacitors, get the corrosive glue out. Now, don't be surprised, because it happens to the best. It's just a fact of life. When you're removing that glue, very frequently, you'll have to replace parts. You may end up having to replace a PLL chip. You may end up replacing resistors, capacitors, anything that stuff has touched. If the oxidation or corrosion is not too bad, it can be cleaned off, and it's fine. But, little tiny toroidal transformers like this little midget guy back here, that has some really tiny wires on it. It's not uncommon, and that always has that corrosive glue on it. And it's not uncommon when you take that stuff off, the wire has been corroded so much, and it's so small to start with, the instant you touch it, the wire breaks off. So, if your tech tells you, I had to rewind this toroid transformer, hey, he's probably right. He's not trying to rip you off. He's probably, the instant he touched it, just bink, all the wires broke off because they were so thin. That's just going to happen, Same thing with anything back here that might have had that glue on it. If it's really bad, might need to replace jumper wires, or like I say, resistors. Occasionally you have to replace one or two of the resistors here, or like this poly dip cap, Or like I say, even the PLL, it's very common, like even this one had it. we'll be able to get it to focus on it. Hocus pocus focus. You just don't like that little tiny IC, do you? Oh, for Pete's sakes. Really? You're not cooperate at all today, are you? There you go. You can see that left-hand lead. It's kind of black and brown. Well, that's because the glue was on there. And what happens is, down here where it gets really thin, where the thickness of it gets thin, that little thin part, it's very common to see this one, and possibly even the third leg of these PLL chips just snapped off. They're just, not even touched it. That's before anybody removes the glue. You'll have a radio and it's not working. And that will be the problem. The leads are just corroded off of the PLL chip. Same thing with the VCO block right here. Very frequently you'll find a radio that's not working, it's DOA, and you'll find the leads are just completely gone. They're just corroded off of there. So yeah, if somebody tells you, I had to replace the VCO block or the PLL or something like that because, the leads were gone, that's not uncommon. But yeah, doing all this hocus pocus hoo-ha work that's just basically sucking money out of your wallet, tell them they can keep that. They can do that to somebody else's radio, because you know better. So, there you go. In case, there's another Cobra 2000 GTL. And God, I've got another one to do after this one. I have not touched Cobra 2000 in, it seems like a year. I know it hasn't been that long, but it sure in the heck seems like a year. And I don't know what it is. And all the radios are from different people, different parts of the country. It's almost like telepathy or something, that everybody that has a Cobra 2000 that wants to get them done, magically their brains get in sync, and within like a 1 or 2 week period, I'll get a flood of these things. Well, I've just finished one. I just finished this one. I've got another one here, and I've got 2, or is it possibly 3? I've either got 2 or 3 more Cobra 2000s coming to be restored. It's just, and then I won't see any for Lord knows how long. It'll be a rash of something else. It's just weird how things work out like that. I'll get a run on a certain make and model of radio and then won't see them for a long time, and then all it takes is one person will contact me, and within the next week or two, I get a flood of that, whatever that radio happens to be. But there you go. Hope you enjoyed.